Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me on the episode 6 of Coach Talks with Shreyas. And this topic is really very close to my heart because it is one of the main issues that I encounter on a daily basis when coaching my executive clients. And I'm very glad that I have a great expert and a best-selling author who will be delivering some realistic approaches and probably will hand out a few tools for effective stress management. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Pete Alexander. Hello, Professor
Shreyas,
Pete.
thank you so much for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for accepting my invite on such a short notice. And I sure know that from our previous collaborations that this topic is really very close to both of us, and we are striving very hard on a consistent basis to actually help out our clients relieve stress. So it's a great topic, and I'm very glad that you're here to deliver a few tools and approaches for the benefit of our audience.
Well, I'm happy to help in any way I can.
And I'm glad to see some familiar faces as well. Hey, Joe, thanks for joining us live. And I'm sure a few of them will be joining very soon. And usually, Restream is a bit delayed when it starts showing the replay. So we'll just pick up whoever comes in a short while. This week, it's been very curious for me because I've never had people really ask the reason behind choosing a certain topic. And this week, about 12 different people were really curious as to why I added the word realistic. So, Professor Pete, if you don't mind, I would just like to take a few minutes before you introduce yourself to actually say why I chose the word realistic. So the very reasoning is pretty simple. Number one, these approaches and tools that Professor Pete will be sharing are actually tried and tested by him to overcome his own issues with stress, which I let Professor Pete explain in detail a little while later. So I've also collaborated with Professor Pete on 3 to 4 different occasions, and having tried those approaches myself, I feel it is very real. So that was the primary reason why I chose the word realistic. And second, stress is something which is very real for all of us. I would really say that it is near impossible to have a stress free life because the only way it is possible is by effective discipline and having the right mindset, which for a common person might be difficult given the various situation that is going on right now if you've been watching the news lately. So
Mhm.
the stress, since the problem is real, the solution has to be real as well. So that was the second reason. And finally, the third reason that I thought of was to have something which you can readily implement right after ending this live stream, so you don't have to really put in efforts to learn about these techniques in detail, understand the science, understand the concept, because it is very simple and eloquently put by Professor Pete. So I think these three reasons really sum up why I call it a realistic approach. Professor Pete, if you would like to add any reasons behind calling it realistic approaches.
Sure, I think what you were talking about makes total sense, Shreyas. I would add that, most of us, whether we're working out of the home or working in an office, or raising our children, whatever it happens to be, we are strapped for time. And it's the realistic opportunities to reduce our stress, we need to figure out ways to do that in a very short amount of time. And so that's another thing that I think is important about this, because if we can at least take 1 or 2 minutes a day to do a little bit of self care, that will be the benefits over time will be enormous. You just have to start using it. And so that's another part that I would talk about with that realistic.
Definitely. I think that is time is something which really seems to be a big hurdle whenever we talk with our respective clients. And when you say it is just a few minutes of the 24 hours, let us not take it a day, but if you would take it as 24 hours, just a few minutes, I think that is a really great advantage that you have bought into these approaches. So before we proceed with the discussion, if you could introduce yourself in a brief uh, for a minute or two. That would be really
Sure, sure. As everybody knows, I'm Professor Pete Alexander, and I've been doing stress relief work since 2018, when I had burnout. And the it's I've had a lifelong a lifelong relationship with stress, from a very dysfunctional childhood, and then trying to be a workaholic throughout my career. And that, it's crazy, because it started taking its serious toll on my health. And the first huge sign of that was in 2008, when I was diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes. But I didn't listen to my body about what stress was doing to it. So I went another 10 years, burning the candle at both ends, like most entrepreneurs do, until I ended up in the emergency room. And I was 1 hour from being comatose. And the crazy thing about that is, I had an extended stay in ICU after that emergency room visit. And on my second day in ICU, my boss at the time texts me at 6 a.m. and says, "You have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it?" Now, my boss knew I was in the hospital. And what a surprise. I didn't have, my work laptop with me. And so I started, trying to do something with that webinar from my phone, which is a difficult thing to do when you're the organizer. And the nurse at the time was checking my blood sugars, because they were so high when I was admitted to the hospital. They were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read my numbers. They just said high. So they estimated that it was 8 to 10 times higher than normal.
Mhm.
And so when she went to take my blood, my numbers had come back down into at least more reasonable. They were still high, but more reasonable. And they shot straight back up. And she says to me, and this is pretty much a complete stranger, she says to me, "You realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place." And that was the epiphany moment I needed, where I realized I was trading my career, my health, for my career. And, that is a very bad trade. And that is something that I've been trying to communicate to people for the last 3 years. Don't trade your health for your career. It is a very bad trade. It's not worth it, because without your health, nothing else matters.
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story and your journey dealing with stress. So, there are three stages that I already received when you just shared your story. One was to ignore the outliers of stress and what your body was telling you, and going
Mhm.
against the body's wishes. And
Right.
second, you yourself going through this tremendous issues which really do not seem like it will happen for everyone, but in the end you just really were forced to get yourself admitted to the hospital, and still you were very reluctant or trying to just go on with the hustle culture, like people call it. And third is, of course, the epiphany, like this is it. This is the moment where you actually do something, get out of it, and make something better out of your life, or you just keep doing the things that you do and feel yourself go even further down. So you
Mhm.
this story just illustrates all these three stages so well that it becomes a great precursor for the next question that I would be asking, which is, what is stress? What How do you define stress, and where does it actually originate from?
Well, so defining stress is just basically having, some negative stress, I should say, because there's good stress and there's negative stress, and the negative stress is typically in one of two flavors, I like to call it. One is rumination or about the past, where we're worried about something, we're guilty about something that happened in the past that we either did or didn't do. And the fact of the matter is, we can't change that. We can't. We can learn from it, but we can't change it. And to continue to worry about the past does not serve us. The other is anxiety over the future. And the future hasn't happened. And to have anxiety over something that may or may not happen, the problem with that is we tend, if we're focused on something that might negatively happen in the future, we often manifest that because we're sending that negative energy out to the universe. And I'm a firm believer that whatever energy you send out to the universe, you're going to attract that kind of energy back. And when you attract back negative energy and you're sending it out there about something that you're anxious about in the future, chances are you're going to manifest that negative outcome.
Mhm.
So those are the two areas of stress that I've found that are very important to be aware of. And usually, when we're stressed with one of those two, it's either going to manifest itself mentally or physically. So mentally, it would be a lack of concentration instead of being able to focus. That might be one. Maybe it's mood swings, and you go from happy to sad or angry at a moment's notice. It could be panic attacks that you've never had before. It also, maybe you're drinking more than you normally would. So, alcohol addiction is often a sign of mental negative stress. Physically, it's as the most common one that early on comes on is back and shoulder stiffness, and especially for those of us who work at a desk, we tend to hunch ourselves over when we're stressed. And so the back and shoulder stiffness is a great one. Frequent colds. Maybe instead of having one cold a season, we're getting one cold every month. That could be a sign of it. Either excessive or not enough sleep. Your sleep is completely off. Digestive disorders, and no amount of Pepto Bismol can help you with your stomach. Or maybe you're reaching for uh, the an aspirin every day instead of on occasion because you're getting these headaches all the time. That's a common sign of physical stress. And then weight fluctuations, things like gaining or losing weight rapidly. In fact, just before I was diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes, I lost 30 pounds in 30 days. And I was in my mid 40s. And at first I thought, this is fantastic. I hadn't lost weight in a long time. And I wasn't dieting. I wasn't doing any special exercise. I was just doing my normal routine. And the pounds just kept on coming off. And so after that 30th pound came off, I had blood work and you know, wow, I'm a winner, if you want to call it that way, of having the diabetes that no one else in my family has. So, it's just your body is going to warn you over and over again. And if you do not listen to your body, at some point, the weakest link in your body will break. Mine happened to be the pancreas. So,
I think you've given us a wide description of how to look out for stress and where it originates. And we have had some of the people ask the same question, which is what outliers can we watch out for stress? So I think you've given that a great description of the outliers to watch, which can be both physical and emotional. So just to summarize, I think some of the physical outliers can be gaining excess weight. Second can
mhm,
be a change in your appetite. Third is feeling tiredness, and as you rightly pointed out, having this bout of illness every other month or whenever there is just a small change in external conditions, you immediately fall sick. And
mhm,
emotionally, you can feel drained out, you feel the burnout, you do not have interest in carrying on with the life activities. So I think that really answers about five people who asked the same question, which is what outliers can we watch out for stress. So I think Professor Pete, you've given us great detail. So moving further, uh, what is the first approach that we need to take in order to step onto the path of stress management?
yeah, the first one I would say is awareness. And the awareness is paying attention to your body. You know, if it's something that you're seeing consistently, you gotta be aware of it and take note of it. Because if we continue to ignore it, as we discussed earlier, you're heading down the road to burnout. And so the very first thing is awareness. Because once you're aware of what that you are stressed, then it's like, okay, so now let's talk about what exactly is it that is stressing us out. And often we stress about things that are completely out of our control. So COVID's a great example of that. When, we can be all worried about, oh my gosh, I'm out in public. Am I going to catch COVID? I'm wearing my mask. That person isn't wearing the mask. What's the government doing about it? All these things are completely out of our control. Yet, if we continue to stress about them, it doesn't serve us. What we should focus on is, and this is something that happens to us, it's human nature. Whenever we are faced with a stressful situation, we will focus roughly half of our attention on what is out of our control and half of our attention on what is in our control. And if we can learn, like with COVID, where the government reaction is out of our control, the person next to you is not wearing their mask. You have no control over that. You can't force them to do that. So if you can mentally say, okay, the things that are outside of my control, I'm just going to let that go. I have to not concentrate on that and focus all of our attention, or as much of our attention as possible, on what we can control. What will happen, like things like washing our hands, wearing a mask, avoiding areas, situations where, it could be problematic. Then, if we focus on that, our human nature has our stress reduced, because when we feel like we have more control and we can affect change, that's when our stress goes down.
Absolutely. So those are some key steps. So the primary concern that I readily see in my clients is the focus is on the problem, because I think
Hmm.
that's the easiest thing to do
Hmm.
given any situation. And we have to readily reframe our mindset to start focusing on the solution, or rather, if not the entire solution, how can we be a part of that solution? And I think that is where the real progress or the real stress management actually starts. Um, and Professor Pete, I'm getting quite a lot of questions across different platforms. So would this be right to take a few question and answers before we
Sure.
proceed with the rest of the topic? So the second question that we have, again, it's a very common question. I find stress to be very beneficial. Should I be concerned?
Okay, so that's where we talk about good stress versus bad stress. So Good stress we need that. Good stress allows us it's good stress is also termed eustress, eustress. That's the kind of stress when we are doing something, let's say career wise, that we love our job. We need good stress, eustress, for getting things done. It helps us prioritize things. It helps us meet deadlines, etc. That we should not be worried about at all because that's invigorating. It's the negative stress where we need to take note and try and avoid it. And again, that's that rumination of the past, being guilty, etc., or anxiety over the future that may or may not happen. So if we can separate out the good stress from the bad stress and keep the good stress, everything else will fall into place.
That's really beneficial because sometimes you need that intrinsic motivation, and I think this
Mhm.
you stress or the good stress actually provides you with that intrinsic energy and motivation if you know how to tap into it, and definitely understanding the differences and knowing where exactly you need to apply these tools or the understanding of good stress. I think that is where you can really start making that progress and understanding how to lead a better life. So thank
Mhm.
you for answering that question. The
You
next
bet.
question is, what is the difference between workplace stress and stress related to personal life? Is it interrelated and could be same?
Well, it's not going to be the same. It really depends on how you react to it. Each person reacts to it differently. And so, workplace stress, often that comes from one's supervisor, their
Mm,
manager. And the uh, I wrote a book back 20 over 20 years ago, and it talked about how to motivate employees. And the main reason why people leave a company is a poor relationship with the supervisor. That is the primary reason. And people will say things like, oh no, I got a better opportunity, or I got more money, or whatever it happens to be. But the reality is, in most cases, it's going to be a poor relationship with the supervisor. Now, when you have something like that, a situation like that, um, there are things, once again, within your control and things outside of your control. Within your control, you can try and talk to the supervisor and to communicate what your issues are, what you're feeling, etc. You cannot control how your supervisor is going to react to it or do anything about it, but you have control over the situation yourself because you can at least, instead of being a victim, you can actually express your concerns and at least try and do something about it. So that kind of situation versus, let's say, at home, maybe it's a relationship that you have with your spouse who is being very challenging. That is another type of stress, and if it's something that is really hard for you, you're probably going to manifest that stress similarly to what's happening at work, because we tend to internalize negative stress. So while the stress itself is probably different, the way it's being internalized inside your body is probably the same.
that is one key difference between workplace stress and um, stress related to personal life, which is, I feel, definitely that workplace stress is in a way indirectly out of your control because it
Mhm,
has multi parties involved. So it will be you, your boss, your team members, and probably even the client. So
mhm,
sometimes it is really difficult to pinpoint exactly where workplace stress is arising and utilizing certain methods to relieve that stress. And workplace personal stress, as you rightly pointed out, can be really released by using communication, so talking to people that are close to us and just opening up about our issues and problems sometimes can really be a great starting point to effectively manage that particular stress. So I think that was one more interesting question. Uh, this is rather interesting because this week the audience is kind of one step ahead of our discussion, which is very encouraging. And I find this question very interesting as well. So, what's the influence of gender in workplace stress management?
That's that's an interesting one. I used to think that gender was a huge difference. That okay, that women tend to be more emotional is what the common stereotype is, and that actually isn't the case. It really is depends on the personality of the individual. So because I have had over my career, I have had an equal number of male and female bosses and certainly team members. And the fact of the matter is, it really depends on the individual. So I tended to be more emotional when when stress was happening in the workplace, and there were times where I would have others who would respond to that emotional thing, and we would tend to to create this even more stressful environment because one person gets stressed and then that sets off the rest of the team. Um, what I have found is that instead of thinking about it as a gender situation with stress, it's not. It really is. It depends on the mindset of the individual. And if someone who's emotional, like for me, how I would deal with a stressful situation now is much different than how I would have addressed it 3, 4 years ago, because I know now that getting upset over something that I have no control over isn't going to serve me. Um, and if I have some sort of tension in my body, I know now how to be able to get rid of it or reduce it. Um, and so, yet working with individuals, ones that are more less communicative, more introverted, they tend to internalize things even more because they don't let it out. It's not natural for them. So there's usually techniques for those people that are more effective than maybe one for somebody that's more expressive and extroverted. So that's one of the things that I think is important for that question, is to not think about it from a gender standpoint, but to think about it from an individual and an individual's mindset.
Absolutely. I think that is one of the key distinctions that we need to make, which is surrounding the type of personality, irrespective of gender.
Mhm.
Definitely, there is, I do agree that opportunities for women to express these stress related issues are a bit less, but in the end, it actually depends on how well the person is more comfortable expressing themselves, as you said about and being an introvert and an extrovert, because right now most managers really do not understand that being an introvert is necessarily not an issue at all, because they really like that solitude and they probably might perform very well when left alone. So that is one key reason where there might be undue stress on an individual, because they are coaxed to start expressing and sharing their
Right.
points. Second is again the stereotypes. So it's really imperative to understand what are the different types of stereotypes that is surrounding the issue of stress management, and effectively tackling that stereotypes, so that it indirectly actually can benefit to bridge the gap between different genders as well. So I think that's
Mhm.
an interesting take on this particular question. So we have a few more questions, but I think I'll
Sure.
just keep that aside, and we'll get into the crux part, which is to understand what are some realistic approaches to stress management. So probably we can take the questions after you discuss a few tools with us.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to find something. And the reality is, Something that might work for me may not work for you, Shreyas, and vice versa. So it's always a challenge when you try something and it doesn't work. My feeling is there's so many different things you can try, and most of those will only take a couple of minutes. And once you find something that works, you run with it. You run with it because it's going to be something that you can rely on. And one of my favorites is if you have 1 minute of solitude, either at your desk or shoot, I've had people who go into the bathroom to do this, or if you're in your car or wherever it happens to be, is I'll walk you through this. So if you close your eyes and you take a deep breath in, and what I want you to do is go in your mind to a place you like to relax. Maybe it's a park, maybe it's a beach, maybe it's your backyard, maybe it's the spa. Wherever it is that you like to go there now in your mind and take in all of your senses. So what do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your face? Do you feel the grass or the sand under your feet? What do you smell? Do you smell the fresh air? Maybe the lotion from the spa? And what do you hear? Do you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Maybe the water splashing on shore? What do you see? Do you see the blue sky? Maybe the green of the trees or the grass? Whatever it is, take it all in and then take another deep breath in. And open your eyes. It's a simple visualization exercise that takes 1 minute, and it automatically causes you to do slow, deep breaths as well as you're going to your happy place. And that is something that we can do at any point. All we need is 1 minute of distraction-free time because
Mhm.
it doesn't work, obviously, if you're in a busy meeting room or something like that. But that has been something that has been very effective because it helps ground you, really does.
Absolutely. And I did feel the benefit straight away because this is something I always do because slow breathing really helps me cool down. And I'm sure there are few audience members who are already feeling that benefit right away. So, Joe, it really is a great exercise and it's a great learning. So, thank you for sharing that tool with our audience. And we are getting some quite a few encouraging responses. So coming back to the questionnaire, how to communicate this feeling of stress with your boss? And that's
Yeah,
really an important
that's
question.
a very good point. You can't, first of all, you can't be afraid of that. And the reason, one thing that we forget about when we're working for somebody, especially if we are a good worker, we're a knowledge worker, we've been trained, we're doing a good job. The fact of the matter is, if you burn out, that is going to be very problematic for your boss because he or she is going to have to pick up that slack, either dump it on somebody else or have to do it themselves. So it's in their best interest to make sure that you don't burn out. So a lot of times, what I have found is that managers don't realize what they're doing to their employees, a certain uh, thing that they do. And I'll give you a perfect example. So I had a boss who would love on the weekends to fire off emails.
Mhm.
Actually, in the evening and on the weekends, would fire off emails, and I would get these emails, and I would look at them, and I'd start thinking about, okay, what do I have to do? And then I'd start responding to them. And it used to drive me crazy because the fact of the matter is, when we don't detox from technology and we're checking our work messages in the evenings, on the weekends, on our vacation, what happens is we never stop working. Our mind and our body don't get to recharge. And so I found that I was working a lot more than I really needed to. And finally, I decided I needed to talk to him about it. And it turned out that he did not have the expectation that I needed to respond to the email. It was he had a thought and he wanted to get the email out so that he got it off his desk, basically. But he had no expectation that I was supposed to respond to it until, let's say the next work day. So by communicating this to each other about what his action was doing to me and how I was reacting to it, we came up with a solution where he would just draft the email that he wanted to send, but he would not send it until the morning of the next workday. And that way I wouldn't get it until a workday so that I'm in work mode. And that was a very simple thing because he just had it in his outbox and he would just hit send first thing in the morning, and that was fine. That was fine. And he did that for everybody because I wasn't the only one that had an issue with that. So long story short, it's really important to talk to your boss about it because they do not want to lose you. And if they are not willing to support you in trying to reduce your stress, then you're working for the wrong person.
Absolutely. I think it is very important to communicate, or at least have a channel of communication open, because in the end nothing is more important than your health and your
Mhm.
life. Absolutely. Because
Right.
Professor Pete, you share your own experiences where continuing to do the same thing just in the end became so expensive that it adds to more stress, not just for you but also for those who are around you and your family, of course. So if at all your boss is kind of ignoring your attempt to communicate the level of stress you have, I think the bottom line, the best thing to do is to just move out of that organization. I know the financial status might be an issue, but if we tend to ignore, I think the further cost that comes is something which is even unimaginable. So
Mhm.
I think
And the
that
other
is
thing too is that if you're documenting it, if it's a large enough organization that has an HR department, perhaps there's a channel you can go there if you want to stay in the company. But in most cases, if you frame it properly, where you're not just saying, "Oh, what you're doing to me is stressing me out" or something like that, but to just to talk about it from a educational standpoint about that that you like working for the company, but you're feeling undue stress because of these situations, chances are your boss is going to try and do something about it. If they want to keep you, they're going to be smart enough to try and work with you to help alleviate some of that stress. And like I said, a lot of times they don't realize that they're doing it.
absolutely. I think we have already shared a great meditation and breathing exercise. So, is there any other tool that you'd like to share, Professor Pete?
Well, I mentioned it. The detox from technology is a really important one. I know that we're carrying our phones all the time, but it's really important to be present with those that are important to you. So, what I always recommend is that if you can get into the habit of an end of day anchor, where maybe it's turning off your laptop, or it's setting an alarm, or turning off your monitor, or whatever it happens to be, you get into a habit where that is you're done with your work for the day, and you do not keep checking your messages because, as I said, you never stop working if you continue to be checking your messages in the evenings, weekends, vacation, what have you. The other thing that's very important is being present with someone, like we've all been in restaurants where you look at somebody at a table and they're all on their phones. They're not paying attention to each other at all. And I always wonder, why bother coming to a restaurant if you're not even, communicating with each other? You might as well just
Yeah.
get takeout. But what I think is a great activity is, if you're going out to dinner with someone important in your life, turn off your phone. Not silence it, turn it off, and ask the other person or other people to do the same. It is amazing, just for dinner,
Mhm.
how you're going to be more present with each other, and the communication will be amazing for that. It might be a little awkward at first,
Mhm.
but you will feel better because of it. So it's really getting into the habit of doing that. Another thing, from a detox standpoint, I know a lot of people use their phone as their alarm clock. Well, guess what? If you're tossing and turning, or if you get a buzz from a text coming in from your phone, what happens? You roll over and you pick it up and you look at it, and all of a sudden, boom! Your brain is awake and stuff. It's really important to try and avoid that. And one of the best ways to avoid that is, instead of having your phone as your alarm, what you do is you have one of those just simple alarm clocks. And and keep your phone outside of your bedroom. Like, for example, for me, my phone stays in the kitchen when I go to bed. I don't want it anywhere close to me, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Is that if I see the screen light up and I'm awake, I'll be curious and I'll say, "Oh no, I shouldn't look at it." And then, of course, I'm thinking about it, so I have to look at it, and then the problem starts. So, detoxing from technology is a really important thing for us. And the vacation mode, when we take vacation, the whole purpose of taking a vacation is to get away from work. So you have to be able to set boundaries to people, your boss, others at work. Understand that, you know what, you're not going to be responding right away to messages when it's on your own time. That's really important to do, just for your own self-care.
I think it is really important to stress on the need for digital detox, because ever since I got this tip from you, which I remember was, I think, on a podcast, I've taken Saturdays and Sundays totally off. I don't
Mhm.
really get on social media. And that, in a way, has not just helped me manage stress, but in a way has also helped my productivity improve. And now I have
Mhm.
this better time that I have to pursue my hobbies or just spend time with my family, because I live abroad. So it's really rare that I get such an extended time with family. So, one, it is helping me develop these happy memories, which I think will be a great motivation for me to perform better once I go back to my full time job. And second, the amount of screen time has drastically reduced, so my eyes feel a lot better. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just on a totally different level. Now I get to notice very small thing, intricate things that, I see whenever I see an artwork. So I'm able to recognize that much better. So the benefits of this digital detox is just not limited just for stress management, but
Right.
it just has an indirect domino effect on a whole lot of different things. The next question is quite interesting. So earlier we discussed from the employee perspective. So now we have a question from the other side of the spectrum, which is from the boss. So how do I create a safe space for my team to get them to share their stressful experiences?
Oh, that's a great one. Well, I did this for my team, and it's being vulnerable. That's what I would suggest. And to demonstrate what stress has done to yourself, describe a situation that you've been dealing with, and be open and vulnerable about it, because that will allow your team to feel like you're more approachable. So, instead of going in there and saying, "Okay, I know that it's been stressful and stuff. What do you tell me about your stress?" Well, people aren't going to be willing to open up about that. So, that's, if you're able to demonstrate that yourself. A second way to do it too is, instead of asking for individual stressors, you could have the team come up with their, what are stressors that the team is experiencing, or the organization is experiencing. It's easier for them to talk about that than their individual stuff. And then, based on how you respond to the team dynamics, then they're going to be more willing to come to you individually to talk about their own individual stresses. That's how I would approach it.
I think that is a great approach to show people that you're there to actually care, and it's just not a corporate gimmick where, in order to show that your team is being well taken care of, you do that. So I think a great way to do it is, as you mentioned, to keep it anonymous and send probably a questionnaire which you can carefully study and start implementing those measures. So once your
You do?
employees see that the measures are being implemented and that you're actively considering their feedback, I think that will be a really great motivation for employees to come on an individual scale and have this conversation with you. So it's really important to show them that you actually care and not just do it for the sake of doing it. So I think that is a really great place to start. Um, so this is one more great question. So I'm from a military background, and stress is totally inevitable. How can I manage this?
That's a very challenging one. My son is in the Air Force, so I can completely appreciate that. Yeah, you're not going to be able to get away from that stress. That is from um, a position standpoint, that is one that is absolutely inevitable. So the only thing that I could say is that when you can, you take time for yourself. So there's going to be the points where you have no choice. You have to do that, but you have an opportunity to just do something simple like the visualization exercise, where you feel like it's stress, 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 but there's always a time to go to the bathroom, to be able to take a minute or two and to try and calm yourself down. Because if you can ground yourself in a stressful situation, you will be able to handle it better than if you let that stress continue to rise, 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 to the point where it's extreme in your body. So that's what I would suggest. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's certain things when you're in the military where it's going to be stressful, and you can't avoid that, but you can handle it, or take measures like visualization, deep breathing, and there's an, the anxiety that can be created in a situation like a military situation. One of the things that is very effective is if you can imagine the outcome being a magnificent outcome. So, if it's a stressful situation where it could be a confrontation, that you imagine the confrontation, 15 minutes after it resolving peacefully. And what is that feeling? If you can imagine that, it can reduce your stress as well.
First of all, I would just like to thank this gentleman and your son for the service to your respective nations. I'm really grateful you're servicing your nation. So, I think one important aspect when it comes to military, I think, is one great tip to follow is the 1 to 2 minute meditation that you just mentioned a little while earlier, because I do agree the life there is very fast paced and you have to be on your toes always. So, taking just that 1 or 2 minutes might considerably reduce the level of stress, if not totally eliminate it, which is one thing why I feel it is the duty of all the citizens to take the best care of the vets. I think that is the only point I can add at this particular point of time. Um, So we have one more question. So can you please explain the difference between good and bad stress?
Sure, sure. I mentioned it earlier. So good stress, also known as eustress, EUSTRESS, that is the kind of stress that we get when we're working in a job or we have our company, whatever our career is, where we really enjoy it. And good stress, eustress, is the type of stress that when we have a deadline, or we need to get something done. Um, and that kind of stress is going to manifest itself much more positively within your body because you're enjoying doing what you do. So that's good stress. Bad stress or negative stress has two different flavors, shall we say. One is rumination, where we're guilty or worrying about something in the past that we cannot change. We can't. And so we can learn from it, but we cannot change it. The other negative stress is anxiety over the future because it may or may not happen. But if we continue to worry about a negative outcome of the future, it's more likely that we'll manifest that. And so you have to be very careful about worrying about the future. Instead, as I mentioned earlier about the military application, a great way to reduce stress about something in the future is to imagine a magnificent outcome happening 15 minutes after the event. So, like, let's say that um, you have to have a difficult conversation with someone,
Mm.
and you're worried about that conversation. Well, if you imagine it being a magnificent outcome, that it comes out exactly the way you wanted it, and how would that feel 15 minutes after that encounter? Then that will tend to reduce your stress.
I think that is, it's really important to understand this differentiation because most people, I think, go wrong because they feel that stress is just a motivation. So I think just understanding these two differences really make it better to manage stress whenever it happens. I think this is one more apt for the current situation. We are working parents and we are stressed by the pandemic. We feel our children are bearing the brunt of this. Any tips around this?
Yeah, boy, there's so many number of things that the poor kids are going to be, uh, the brunt of it. I mean, I know for various things, whether it's just the dynamics of the education, having to be at home more with the parents, shoot, even having be, all the money that's being spent to try and support the economy when it's slowed down. All those things are things that could be dumped on the children. The To help them, the best thing to do is to, as from a parental standpoint, is to let them know, try as best as you can not to come across as critical to them. I know it's very hard as a parent. I've got 3 kids, and I mean, it's very, very hard. But what is really important is, instead of just telling them this is what they should do, etc., what I found with my kids is asking them questions. Like, for example, if they're struggling with a particular situation, instead of giving them the solution right off the bat, what I like to do is ask them simple question about, if they're feeling like they cannot do something. Let's say in school there's a project that they feel like they're not going to be good enough for. Instead of saying, "Oh, well, you just got to do it," that's not going to help. That's not going to help. But a great question that I like to ask, and I've used this with actually with my youngest, who tends to be very hard on himself, is I ask, "What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would that look like? What would you do?" And so, for example, my youngest, when he graduated high school, he really didn't know what he wanted to do. And when you think back about it, most of us don't. When we graduate high school, we don't know.
Mhm.
We're too young. Well, he was taking it very hard, and so I asked him that question in particular, and I said, "Don't give me the answer right away. I want you to think about it for a couple of days and let's talk." A couple of days later, he came back to me and he said, Dad, that was a really interesting question. And first of all, when you get a teenager to compliment you, you've hit a home run. Uh, but then he came up with three different things that he was thinking about doing. All of them were completely off the wall from anything he has done before. And that was 3 years ago. And he is now pursuing one of those three. And it's just very interesting because it got him thinking. And it was a supportive question as opposed to, just telling him this is what you have to do. So I would ask, just be open and ask some questions and make sure that what you're asking is fully supportive of them and not supportive with them just saying you must do this, the kind of thing, because that's what we do as parents. We want the best for our kids. We just got to be careful about how we communicate it to them.
Definitely, I think effectively communicating and, in a sense, letting them take the ownership if they are old enough. I think that
Mhm.
is where parents can slightly, just take a step back in order to let their child grow, because this is one of a kind experience, which I think, if seen in the right perspective, can help prepare children for the future as well. So just letting them take ownership wherever it can be done in a meaningful manner. I think that is really important for parents to understand and not just be there to advise each step of the way, which is
Mhm.
what I can take from your example as well. So thank you for sharing that once again.
Sure.
I think this is the final question that we have for the day. I'm naturally unorganized and Mondays feel a lot stressful. How do I get around this?
Was it Mondays? Mondays are
Yes.
usually okay.
The person is
So
naturally unorganized, so they feel Monday is a lot stressful. So is there
so
something called naturally unorganized? I'm kind of curious around that.
What's really hard? So obviously there is the unorganized. So I can see Monday comes and it's like, oh, okay. So there's a couple things there that come to my mind. One is to look at what it is that's causing this unorganized opinion of yourself. So that would be one to kind of look at that a little bit more. Um,
Mhm.
I had one client who said that they never had time to get to certain things that they needed to get done, and they chalked that up to being unorganized. And simply putting activities in their calendar. So, not just saving a calendar for meetings, but actually blocking time that says, okay, do project one, project two, whatever it happens to be. And this is both personal and professionally. That was something that got them to be able to get things done because it was reminding them of those certain things. Another one is reframing Mondays because um, instead of thinking about Monday as, oh my gosh, now my unorganized self is going to be, on display, think of Mondays as this is a fresh new week. What if I wasn't unorganized? What if I organized myself? Those are the kind of things you have to, if you continue to put yourself down, that inner critic is going to definitely take its effect on you. So you have to look at it from the positive, okay? So it's Monday, it's a fresh new week to explore, new week to figure out how I can be more organized. That's what I would suggest.
Absolutely. I think reframing your mindset is probably the most simplest thing to do. Uh, the other simplest thing to do is just start organizing your tasks and maintaining a to-do list, probably, which will help you keep accountable of yourself, or have someone else as an accountability partner, so that
Right.
you can check in with them and take this one step at a time. And obviously, the most important thing of all is not to feel this overwhelm or the need to be organized as well. Sometimes, that unrealistic expectation of you seeing yourself as not being organized might uh, be stressful as well. So I think these are great points that we
And
have covered.
another one, if is that might be an opportunity to have like a virtual assistant too,
Mhm.
who could take care of some of the more mundane tasks, so that you can focus on the stuff that requires your mind share.
Absolutely. I think delegating tasks, it's one of the most underrated skill, especially if the person who was asked this question. If you're a business owner, I think what Professor Pete said really works well and will save you a lot of time, and in the end will probably motivate you to be more organized. So thanks for
Mhm.
bringing that point in, Professor Pete. And we have been having this conversation for almost an hour, and I never realized the time flowing so fast. Thanks to the audience for keeping us so engaged. I think we didn't have to really worry about our talking points. So, as a closing statement, any suggestion, tips, or resources that you'd like to suggest for our audience?
Sure. I welcome the audience to go to my website. I've got about 150 different tips on my blog, which is petealexander.com. And as I mentioned earlier, it's you try one, takes you a minute or two. If it doesn't work, big deal. You took 1 or 2 minutes, try another one until you find the one that works for you, and then you run with that. And the thing that I just got to remind people about is please do not take your health for granted. Your health is everything, because without your health, you're not going to be any good to your business, your job, your family, your friends, what have you. Take care of your health. That is the most important thing that you can do. And do not trade your health for your career, because that's a very bad trade.
Absolutely, and that will be definitely an expensive one, which you definitely not want to do in this lifetime. I
Mhm.
have linked Professor Pete's profile in the post, so please go check his profile. There is a host of amazing techniques and tools, and if you feel that you need to take this one step forward, Professor Pete is always a DM away, and he will ensure it gets back to you in the best possible time. And I've also put in Professor Pete's website. Please do go there, have a look at the different techniques, pick out the ones that work for you, and just take the practice and keep practicing. And I hope you will be soon on this path of stress management. So, Professor Pete, once again, thank you so much for accepting this invite and sharing these realistic approaches to stress management, which I'm sure the audience found very insightful. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you so much for having me on the show, and I really appreciate everybody who participated.
Amazing. The audience participation has been really a guiding light for this episode. So I would like to thank you all for joining us and giving your encouragement, sharing your questions, and I hope you did find some basic insights to build upon. So until next time, please take care and stay safe. Shreyas signing out.